Hello, it's Wendy. Welcome to the channel and welcome back to this Drops Design Sky Stripes jacket tutorial. This is part 2 of the tutorial. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, I would recommend that you go back and get started there and then come and join me when you get to this point. I have worked the upper part of the sweater so far. So starting at the neck, dividing for the raglan sleeve, and you can see how the sweater is going to come together at the front with the buttonholes on the right front and the button band on the left front. And if we take a closer look, just so you can see if it matches what you've done, there's the left front button band, the pattern stitches in the middle with the 8, 6, 8, 6, 8 rows, and then I have another 4 down here, so I have a total of 40 rows at this point for my size. Then the row of stockinette stitch with the increases on either side. Same thing for the other side of the sleeve. This is the back, and then the right sleeve with the stockinette lines and the increases either side and the buttonholes. I'm in the paragraph on the pattern just before where it says body in capital letters. And I've worked to the point where it says that I have increased a total of 16 times for the size 3/4. It might be different for your size. And I have a total of 225 stitches. The next instruction is to continue with pattern and stripes until the piece measures 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches, or whatever the size is for the one that you're making. Right now I have just about 5 inches, so I'll have to knit for a few more rows until I have 5.5 inches. It'll have to be an even number of rows because I need to end with the right side facing in order to divide for the body and the sleeves. The other thing to note here is that we're not going to do any more increases. We're just going to continue even in the pattern and across where we were increasing before, and I'll show you what that looks like. So just work your 5 band stitches as usual. I'm going to leave that marker there because it reminds me to do the band stitches. Then the knit one and the pattern, purl one, knit one, purl one, knit one, and so on. Now I'm coming up to the marker. I'm not going to do any increases this time. I'm just going to continue across. So that's a knit one, then my last stitch is a purl one. Take the marker out. The next stitch is a knit one. That's the same as the column of stockinette that I did here. Then a purl, then a knit, and so on. And if your pattern is correct, you should be able to just continue right across where you were increasing before. And do the same thing where the other markers were, taking them out as you go and working across just with your pattern. Working back on the reverse side, if you followed along with me in the part 1 video, you'll remember that all of the pattern charts were worked purl on the back. So with the exception of garter stitch for the first 5 and the last 5 stitches, which are the band stitches, all of the other stitches on this reverse row will be purl stitches. My piece is wide enough now. I've got to the 5.5 inches I need for this size. The pattern says on the next row, divide for the body and sleeves as follows. Work 5 band stitches in garter stitch, 29 stitches in pattern as before, or your number might be different, but for me the 29 gets me to that same column of stitches where my increases were happening. Then slip the next 45 stitches on a stitch holder. Again, your numbers might be different. This is for the sleeve, so I'm going to take the next 45 stitches and transfer them over to a stitch holder. Okay, so there's my 45 stitches on a stitch holder. You could use a scrap piece of yarn and just run it through with a yarn needle. That could work too. So we're going to set those out of the way and come back to them later for the sleeve. Then the next part of the instruction says to cast on 6 stitches in the side under the sleeve and then work the back stitches. And here's where we come to an error in the pattern, and I've been over this multiple different ways, and I'm confident that that number 6 should be a 7 for the number of stitches in the side under the sleeve. And I do believe that that applies to every size, and let me show you how I figured that out. So the front part here we can see ends with a knit stitch, and the back begins with the knit stitch. The sleeve stitches begin and end with a purl stitch. So if I were to cast 6 stitches on here, I would do purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. But then the next stitch is a knit. I need an odd number of stitches in between those two pieces. So I'm going to compensate for that by doing 7 stitches in the underarm section of each sleeve instead of 6. And like I said, I believe that that applies to all of the sizes. I've checked all of the numbers, and I think that this error is something that's going to throw people off, and it's going to accumulate because there are going to be a few more things that are out of whack because that number's not right. But don't worry, I will give you the proper numbers as we get to them. For now, what we need to do is cast on 7 stitches under the sleeve. And I'm going to turn it around so the inside is facing and use a knitted cast on to cast on those stitches. To do a knitted cast on, simply go into the stitch as if to knit. So these are my finished stitches on the left. Wrap as if to knit. Pull the stitch through, swing that right hand needle around, and scoop the stitch off with the left hand needle. That's one. Knit the next one, pull it through, swing it around, scoop it off. That's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Turn back to the outside. And then continue going across the stitches of the back in pattern. My first stitch is a knit, and then a purl, and so on across. When I get to the other sleeve, I'll put the 45 stitches on a stitch holder again and do the same thing with the 7 stitches cast on under the sleeve. Coming back, I will do my 5 garter stitches on each end and purl every stitch in between. At the end of that paragraph, just before where the capital letters for body, it gives you the number of stitches that you should have after you finish this row. I'm going to put the correct number of stitches on the screen here. So for my size, the 3/4 size, instead of 147, I should have 149. So whatever your size is, you will have 2 more stitches than what it says because we've added 7 under each sleeve instead of 6. At this point, the sweater should look like this. So all of my working stitches for the body part are on this needle with the sleeve openings on the stitch holders. I'm going to continue working around back and forth on these body stitches for the length specified in the pattern, which for my size is 7.5 inches. Remembering also to do the buttonholes when I come to them. So I've got 2 so far at 2 3/4 inches apart. I won't need to measure the next one because I know that there are 11 ridges in between. So I'll just count the number of ridges and put in the rest of the buttonholes when I get to the right number. The pattern also says that after 5 of the lighter colored stripes, stop changing stripe colors and just continue in the blue. So you'll see on the picture that there's a wider blue section at the bottom that includes the ribbing. So after 7.5 inches from where I divided for the sleeve, I'm going to stop and come back and we'll do the ribbing together. The body of the sweater is coming along. I'm just about ready to start on the ribbing. I have the right length from where I divided for the sleeves. The pattern says at this point to add some stitches. The reason for adding stitches is that I'm going to switch to the smaller needle, the 3mm needle, and work in a rib, and that will pull in quite a bit at the bottom of the sweater. So in order to keep it a little more in line with the sweater rather than pulling in a lot, it asks you to add some stitches. For my size, it says to add 33. But if you'll remember, in order to fix the error in the pattern, we added a stitch under each armhole. So I'm going to put the new numbers on the screen and actually subtract those 2 stitches from these totals. And that way we'll end up with the right number of stitches. So in this case, I'm supposed to end up with 180. So I'm only going to add 31 instead of 33. So refer to the number on the screen, and if you increase by that number of stitches, you'll get the right number when it says the total you should have after the increases. So hopefully that makes sense. And like before, we need to divide the stitches that we're increasing across the whole width of the sweater. So I have 149 stitches to begin with. I'm going to subtract 5 on each side for the button band, so that's 10. So I have 139 divided by the 31 stitches that I wish to increase gives me 4.48. So almost 4.5. So if I do an increase after every 4 and then after every 5, 4, 5, 4, 5, and so on, I should be pretty close to the 31 extra that I need. When I get to the end of the row, I will count and make sure that I have the total that's shown on the pattern. And it says just to knit. So no more pattern charts in this section in the middle. We're just going to knit all the way across, starting with the 5 stitches for the button band. Then 4 and a yarn over for an increase. And then 5, or whatever number you've decided you need between your increases. Then coming back, when we get to those yarn overs, we will work them with a twist in them so that they don't leave holes. When you've knit the entire row and you have the right number of increases, turn to the other side, Go back to your 3mm needle and start your ribbing. Remembering to keep the bands in garter stitch. So knit the first 5. And then a knit 2, purl 2, rib. So knit 2, purl this one in the back because that's a yarn over, and purl the next one, knit 2, purl 2, there's another yarn over. So each time you hit a yarn over, work it in the back of the stitch. So for this one, it's a yarn over and it's supposed to be a knit stitch. So I'm going to knit also into the back leg of the stitch. And as you can see, that will put a twist in it. So knit or purl in the back leg of those yarn overs all the way to the other end until you have 7 stitches left, and then knit 2 in the last 2 and knit your 5 band stitches. Repeat knitting the knits and purling the purls, other than the band stitches of course, until your ribbing is as long as it says in the pattern. Then bind off from the right hand side, and I'll come back when I'm ready to bind off. When the ribbing reaches the right length, according to your size on the pattern, it's just a matter of binding off the edge. The pattern makes the suggestion of using your larger needle to do the bind off to avoid it being too tight. So if you tend to make your bind off too tight, that's a great idea. Knit the first 2 stitches, slip the first one over the second one. Knit the next one, slip the first one over. When you get to the ribbing part, bind off in ribbing. And what that means is to, gotta get my thread around to the front, purl when it's a purl stitch, and knit when it's a knit stitch. So bind off in rib. Do that all the way across, and then the bottom edge of the sweater will be finished and we can move on to the sleeves. Going back to the sleeve, the pattern says to take the stitches off of the stitch holder and put them back on to the needle. You can use double pointed needles or a magic loop if you wish. I like to use 2 circulars. I just find that the easiest. And then what I do is I work off of one end of the circular onto the other end of the same needle, and then I go around and I work off of one end of the other one onto the other end. Now the pattern says to pick up 1 new stitch in each of the 6 stitches cast on under the sleeve. But if you'll remember, we left 7 stitches there in order to make the right number for the pattern to work. So I'm going to actually pick up 7. I'm going to pick up 3 with my needle on the front and 4 with the needle on the back side of the sweater. So using the same color yarn that I left off with for that stripe, I'm going to find the middle stitch here of the 7 that I cast off. So 1, 2, 3. This next one is the middle one. So I'll pick pick up 3 on this side, just knitting them for now. And then work the rest of the way around following the pattern. So where I have the columns of knit stitches, I will knit those, and where I have the purl knit purl columns, I'll make sure to stack my pearls on top of that. Now the big thing to remember on the sleeves here is because you're working round and round and not back and forth, instead of every other row being a purl row, you're going to do every other row as a knit row. So if I look at this here, my last row of stitches were all knit stitches. So I'm on a pattern row this time. My first stitch is going to be a purl stitch to correspond with what's below, and then a knit, purl, knit, and so on around. At the end of that round, I need to pick up the rest of the 7 stitches under the sleeve. So I'm going to pick up and knit those. So you'll have a total of 1 stitch more than what it says on the pattern. I'll put the numbers on the screen of the number of stitches you'll have around the sleeve at this point. In my case, I have 52 stitches for the size 3/4. The pattern says to work in the round and continue pattern in stripes as before. The stitch with the marker is knit on every round. Now it's not clear where we put the marker, but it makes sense to me that the decreases are going to happen right here under the sleeve. So in that last stitch, the 4th one that I picked up, I'm going to mark that stitch. That stitch will be knit on every round, regardless of what the stitch before it looks like. So initially, let me see what I have here. Purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. So I'm going to have 2 knits in a row initially. But if you look at the other sleeve, I already did part of that here, that marked stitch will form a knit column all the way up the center of the sleeve as you decrease on either side of it. My next round, because I did a knit purl pattern on this round that I just did, will be straight knit. Then I'll go back to the pattern on the following round, keeping these stripes consistent. So I need to do 8 rows in this color, and then I'll switch to this color for the following 6 rows. On the next round, my first 3 stitches are knit because I just picked them up before the previous round, but I need to continue in pattern. So what I need to do is look for where my columns of purl stitches are and where my columns of knit stitches are. So I know that this one has a purl underneath it. So this one will be knit, this one will be purl, and this one will be knit. So I'm starting my pattern row with a knit stitch. And as you decrease going up the sleeve, you'll just have to make sure that you accommodate for the decreased stitches so that your pattern rows stay consistent and you keep this nice texture with the alternating columns. The pattern says at this point to continue for 3/4 of an inch from where you cast on, and then do the first decrease. So I'm going to do a few more rows and come back when I've hit the 3/4 of an inch from where I picked up under the arm here. All right, time for the first decrease. The last round that I did was a knit purl round. So my next round is going to be plain knit. I like to do the decreases on the plain knit round, but it doesn't really matter. This last stitch here at the underarm is my marked stitch. Each time I switch from a knit purl round to a plain round, I do it at that point, right? So just to be clear, in case you're working with double pointed needles and yours looks a little different, at the underarm, we start the new round. Do a knit round, and then a knit purl round, and a knit round, and a knit purl round, and so on. You can take a moment to go back and read the decrease tip. But what the decrease tip is saying is that on the round where you're decreasing, you're going to slip, slip, knit the 2 stitches before the marked stitch and knit 2 together for the 2 stitches after the marked stitch. So however you have your stitches arranged, your marked stitch will always be knit, the 2 before it will be slip, slip, knit, and the 2 after it will be knit 2 together. Now because I have my marked stitch as the last stitch in the round, my first 2 stitches in this round will be knit 2 together, and the last 2 stitches, when I get all the way around, will be slip, slip, knit. So I'll come back at the end of the round. At the end of the round, with 2 stitches left before my marked stitch, I'm going to slip, slip, knit. If you've watched my knitting videos before, you know I like to slip the first one knit ways, the second one from the back purl ways, then put the needle back through, wrap to knit, and put them over. That makes a nice right leaning decrease, and knit the marked stitch in the middle. So you'll continue working a knit purl row, a knit row, a knit purl row, and so on, switching colors, keeping the continuity of the stripes, and making sure that you compensate for your decreases by keeping your pattern columns the same, and decrease according to the intervals on the pattern. So for my size it's 1.5 inches, but yours might be 2 or 2 3/4 as it says on the pattern, for the number of times that it indicates in total. Your total number of stitches when you get to that point will be 1 more than it says on the pattern, and I will put the numbers on the screen for that as well. So just continue on with your sleeve, decreasing at the intervals that it says until you get to the number of stitches indicated on the screen and the length of the sleeve that's indicated in the pattern. So in my case, that will be 9 inches, and then I will be ready to do the ribbing. I hope that you're enjoying this tutorial so far and that you're finding it easy to make this sweater along with me. I've reached the length that I need for the sleeve, and I have 40 stitches left. You should have whatever number I put on the screen for you earlier. The pattern then says to decrease down to 36, 40, or 44, depending on your pattern for the ribbing section. So instead of decreasing 3, like it says in the pattern, because we've had an extra stitch all the way along from that 7 instead of 6 under the sleeve, I have 40 now, so I'll have to decrease by 4 to get down to 36. You need a multiple of 4 to do the 2 by 2 ribbing, the 2 knit, 2 purl. The other option is to leave it at 40 and just do the ribbing the way it is. I think it looks fairly narrow already, so I might do that. But just so you know that instead of the 3 that it says on the pattern, you'll need to decrease by 4 to get to the right number for the ribbing. Then, using your 3mm needles, do a knit 2, purl 2 ribbing until the sleeve is as long as the pattern indicates, which for a 3/4 is 10 5/8 inches or 27 centimeters. And then just bind off and repeat the whole process with the other sleeve. When the sleeves are all finished, all that's left to do is to sew on your buttons, and your Drops Sky Stripes sweater will be all finished. I hope that you found this tutorial helpful. I'd love to hear from you if you would like to see more Drops design tutorials. Drop me a comment and please hit the like and subscribe button. Thanks for joining me and have a super day.